Constantly looking for the answer. Constantly looking for the light. Never knew where to look, but on the inside, there you can find peace of mind. Constantly looking for the answer. Constantly looking for the light. Never knew where to look, but on the inside, there you can find peace of mind. Forget about the opening of the gates of Babylon. Forget about the key to the new world.
DVD on how to make some pavers. These type of pavers are fairly unique, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to buy them in any retail outlet, but they are nevertheless quite easy to make. The first one is more of a rough texture, where we've taken some flat rocks such as this that we've collected along river banks, we've embedded them into concrete, we've sponged around the side, and it leaves quite an interesting type of paver. The second one involves taking slices of rock that I'll show you just now over there, and we've embedded these into concrete. We've then skimmed it with a grinder and then polished it to give this very unique three-dimensional look as you look into the quartz. These are quite easy to make, because what we've done is we've taken a piece of rock, any type of rock, we've cut slices off it like bread slices, and you can see them all lying over here. We've then cast the concrete into a mold, we've embedded them in, and then we've polished it smooth. So you can see the different types of pavers. Some of them are used for a tabletop, some of them have been used for a little granite table that we are busy making over here. It's got a different type of concrete. This is a Seeker product that's a lot darker. Doesn't require you to put stone in as an aggregate either, because it's quite a tough material. The molds are really easy to make. You can just knock up 4 pieces of wood, and the thickness can vary because you're burying it into the ground. If you're wanting to drive over something like this, it's probably quite worthwhile putting some mesh or reinforcing into the bottom, but for walking on it's not necessarily. This is a metal mold. We've got an opening here with a bolt, so if your mold does stick a bit, you can just split it, and you don't need to fill it all the way to the top with concrete. Just bear in mind though that wherever you put your concrete to, as you put your stones inside, the concrete's going to rise, but that's not a big deal because you can just scoop it out. So that's our overview on the different types of pavers. We'll then take you through a process of making the rough one, then we'll take you through the process of making the smooth one. Pick up a few small ones like this. These small ones might be quite interesting to also embed into concrete, and then instead of polishing them, we'll just sponge out the cement next to it and we'll make a different type of paver. Let's see how they come out. So what we've got here is what I think might work quite nicely. So our idea is to take a rock. You can see it's got a bit of colour and I think it's a bit of granite. We're going to cut some slices off it. Before we pour our concrete, we've got to get some slices that we're going to embed in. Remember, this is the polished variety, not the ones where we sink the flat rocks in. So in order to get this, we need to cut these. So you can look for a suitable bit of granite or quartz. You can use this quartz, it's quite nice. You can see it's just something you find out in the besides rivers or the bush. But we need to cut a flat piece to start with. So we'll cut this off, we'll discard that piece, and then we'll cut the rest. Again, just make sure you've got your glasses, your goggles. It's advisable to wear some boots. I normally manage to hold it with my slops, but if you're not familiar with that, I'd certainly wear some safety boots. So there's our slice. Starts off quite small. As we cut more slices, it'll get bigger and bigger. I can't reiterate how important it is for safety. Just bear in mind when you're cutting with a grinder, sometimes it jumps up, sometimes it kicks back. So go and practice, or start off on a softer piece of rock. But again, just take a lot of care in terms of your safety, because the minute a grinder digs in or it slips, it can have devastating consequences. That's how we cut our slices. From here we'll go up and we'll embed them in concrete, then we'll come back, we'll skim it, and then we'll polish it. Okay, so the first thing that we have to make, regardless of what paver we're making, whether it's the polished variety or the flat rocks that we sink into the cement, we've got to mix some cement. You can use normal cement out of a hardware. You can get a slightly stronger mix. You get different colors. Some may require you to add some aggregate. These are doozy pebbles that we can add. If you're just using cement and sand or Amgani, the mixing instructions are on the bag. I normally use about 1/3 of cement to about 2/3 of Amgani, and I put a handful of doozy pebbles in to just bind it to give it a little bit more cement in. We just level it out with a trowel. Now, unlike conventional pavers, with a conventional paver, it's an inverted mold. So you turn the, when you fill a normal mold, when you pop it up, the bottom is the top and the top is the bottom, because it's got a base on. With this it's slightly different. We're putting substances into the top, so the top has to stay at the top, which makes eliminating air bubbles a little bit more difficult. So before you put the stones in, you can sort of tap the sides, and you'll find little air bubbles come to the top. You don't need to fill the cement all the way to the top either, because as I mentioned, as I put the stones in, it's going to displace some cement as we put in our rocks. Now, one can use any type of flat rock as long as it's not thicker than the mold. So I normally start just by putting something into the middle. I push it down, I pull the cement away, and then so you go along. I normally try and make the middle slightly higher than the sides, which would ensure when it rains you don't get pooling of water in the middle of the mold. It's a bit big. Now, of course, if you want to tap them down with a hammer, don't use a rubber hammer, don't use a normal hammer, because you'll more than likely break them. If your cement is too runny, you'll have to take the stone out, go and wash it in some water, and then reset it again. So that's all we're doing with this. This is not the polished variety. This is once we've set it down, we'll sponge the cement away from around the side. That'll give quite a nice natural look. We need some smaller pieces just to fit in. It's almost like mosaicing with natural rock. You'll find that some of the cement comes up, so you just take your trowel and, if need be, take it out. The problem is if your cement is too wet, that you'll find the rock sinking in. To fill in between, you can use little natural pebbles. You can take some rocks and bash them. Just bear in mind that when you do hit a rock, splinters do come up into your eyes. So either close your eyes when you hit the rock or put some safety glasses on, because especially quartz like this is extremely sharp. Even bits will cut you as it flies off into you. So just to fill in between your rocks, you can pretty much use any natural or any rock really. You could even make this out of slate, offcuts of granite, really anything, because this paver, as opposed to that one, we're not going to polish. All we're going to do with this one is, specifically when it dries a little bit, we're going to take a sponge and we're going to sponge around all the different rocks. But it's a little bit difficult when it's still wet. So the idea now is to smooth everything out, leave it until it dries a little bit, then come back with your sponge and sponge the rocks clean. Okay, for the specific type of paver we're going to make now, which is the flat cut rocks that we've cut from pieces, we're going to embed it into concrete. Once it's dry, we're going to grind it smooth, and then we're going to polish it. So before you put any concrete into a mold, just bear in mind that if you don't put some sort of release agent on the side, it's going to stick. So I just normally use any form of engine oil. I paint it around the sides, I don't let it dry, put your cement in, and you'll find that when your concrete paver is dry, it just pops out quite easily. So don't forget that. Also remember, on the base of underneath your paver, put some plastic, because remember, you don't have a lid to this. This is not an inverted paver. This is what you see on the top is the top of your paver, whereas a conventional paver, when you pour the concrete, the bottom is the top, because when you flip it out, the bottom becomes the top. It doesn't work this way with this, because we have to sink rocks into the top. So don't forget your release agent. The one problem with this type of design is that, as I do reiterate, are the air bubbles. As you tend to grind down the concrete in relation to the second paver, not so much to the first one, because the second one we have to grind down. You sometimes grind into air bubbles. That's the problem with not being able to sufficiently agitate the cement and release all the air bubbles. Nonetheless, there's ways and means of filling it. You can put resin in and things like that. But we'll put our cement into the mold. We've ensured that there's oil around the side. We've got plastic underneath. Try and eliminate some air bubbles. If we can, it's not always that easy without a vibrator. Okay, the next thing we do, as we did with that one, is to take our slices that we've cut and embed them in, ensuring that the middle is slightly above the outside, again to stop pooling with water. I wouldn't push them down too far in the beginning. Just place your rocks and then you can hit them down with a rubber mallet a little bit later. So, your design really is whatever you come up with. The middle one is sinking too much. Take it out. If concrete has gone over the top, wash it in some water and just place it so it sits a little bit higher than the rest. And then we just fill in between with small rocks that we've chipped out or we've broken. You'll find that if your concrete is too moist, as you're tapping it down, the concrete starts to come out over the stone. But remember, it must be smooth, because we're going to be grinding this completely flat. So you can't grind this down to that level. You want it all to be pretty much the same level to start with. Rubber hammer's quite good, because some of these are pretty fragile. If you hit them with a trowel or a normal hammer, you'll find that they'll crack. Then instead of one nice piece, you'll have two pieces. I'm going to put a bit more cement in there because that's a little bit down. But you can see we're getting it pretty smooth and pretty uniform. Okay, we've done a bit of sponging on that one. We're going to come back a bit later when it's just hardened a little bit. This one that we're going to polish, I'm just using a spoon and I'm just taking out all the extra cement so we don't have to grind too much extra off. But again, let it set a little bit before you do this, because if it's too wet, as you start agitating it, some of the rocks start sinking and it just becomes a little bit of a mess. Okay, let me just go over this again. This one we're going to be grinding smooth and we're going to be polishing. This one's going to have a natural rock look. So it's quite important we don't get cement onto the actual rocks, because as you see it now, once we've sponged this smooth, is how it's going to be. So one just wants to sponge off all the cement off the actual rocks. And it is a lot easier to do once it's dry. But we'll come back a little bit later and continue with this. Like that rock there, it's a bit wet now to sponge, because every time I sponge it sinks a little bit deeper. The excess cement we want to take away. I normally use you can use the end of a trowel, or I just use a plastic spoon and I scoop away in between the rocks so the cement's not encroaching onto the rock. But again, you can start that now, and then we'll leave this for about an hour. we'll come back and we'll continue to get it uniform. After that, we'll go and grind this and polish that, and well, this one we'll probably leave for about 10 days before we grind it. This one you can pop out after a day or two and let it set. Sometimes you need to cover this with a wet cloth to stop it drying too quickly, because if this, or both of them, if they dry too quickly, you sometimes get cracking forming. So sometimes it's better to put an old bag or something that keeps moisture in it, wet it, and just keep it moist for a day or so while it's drying. An hour or so later, the concrete's a little bit harder, which would allow us to sponge some of the cement smooth and clear a bit of the rock. We'll then come back in another couple of hours after we've done this and just complete it. There are substances that you can use to get grout off rock if it does set, but the easiest is just every couple of hours come back and sponge it. It's also quite important to get the cement smooth around the rock, so you don't have any little holes or divots around it. It's not a lot of water on your sponge, otherwise you're just putting water back on again. It's 7 days later since we last put these pavers together. I'm going to pop them out, and then we're going to go down below and we're going to grind and polish them. Let's pop the small one out first. So all really we're doing, remember I had oil around the side, so it makes it a lot easier to pop out. And we'll do the same with this bigger one. Pops out very easily. Plastic again is to stop the cement sticking to the board. We're going to take a grinder and we're going to grind this smooth prior to polishing. So very important when you're grinding, lots of stones and stuff are coming up, so these things are quite essential. Two types of masks, one with a little filter on the front, one without. It doesn't really matter, this is a bit more effective because you're not sucking air around the sides. You'll need some glasses and some ear protectors. For grinding, you can use the baby grinder. It just takes a lot longer. I prefer to use the bigger one, this is a designated cutting one. This is a cutting grinding one. You can see it's slightly thicker. So really all we're doing is either one, turning it flat and we're grinding it. Once it's smooth, you can go straight onto the polishing with 5 or 6 or 7 polishing discs. Prior to doing that, I normally use a little grinding wheel that I put onto the grinder. It just smooths it out a little bit better, takes away all the cracks, so you don't have to spend so long with the polishing discs. But nonetheless, I'll show you how this works. So the idea is to get the cement and the rocks all at one level. You'll find some might be higher than the other. So as you grind down, sometimes as the cement comes off, you'll find little air bubbles and little places where the stones are chipped out. That we'll have to fill with resin in the same way that we filled this one over here. All these little dark patches here are places that are filled with a polyethylene or polyurethane resin, but you can use any resin. This was just a a piece of rebar that I embedded into the concrete, because this is going to be a feature and that's going to sit on top of it. But nonetheless, I did a preliminary grind here, then I filled it, and then I would grind with that little wheel again before polishing. Put some water on this and you'll see the granite's true colour come out. You can see that once we finish polishing, that's what it's going to shine at. It just transforms into something just amazingly nice. Right, in terms of polishing, we've just got a normal car polisher here you can buy from any outlet. That's the disc that comes with it. All we've done is we've just cut it to shape. You get a couple of different polishing discs. That's the small one, that's the big one. Each is color coded depending on whether it's coarse all the way down to fine. So we start with a 50 and we end up with a 3000. It's quite important to use water, otherwise it just becomes too abrasive. So you get a small droplet of water coming out and you work your way through the discs, starting at the 50 and going all the way through up to 3000.